They smiled when I asked where the password was written. Not openly cruel. Not loudly mocking. Just that soft, effortless smile people use when they've already decided who you are. In that moment, I understood something I had been refusing to see for years. I had become invisible inside my own family. I am 78 years old. Not deaf. Not confused. Not broken. My hands tremble when I'm tired, yes. My eyes need stronger glasses now. But this mind carried a household, raised children, survived love, loss, widowhood, and 4 decades of work that never stopped just because I was exhausted. Still that afternoon, they looked at me like an object that belonged to another era, useful once, now mostly decorative. "Mom, you don't need to worry about that," my son said, already smiling before the sentence ended. "Technology isn't really your thing." My daughter-in-law laughed quietly. "It's sweet that you're trying though." Sweet. At my age. They stood around the kitchen table, phones glowing in their hands, fingers moving fast and confident. I was the only one sitting down. I had asked a simple question about the new banking app they insisted I install. Paper statements were inconvenient now, they said. Unsafe. Outdated. For them, of course. Not for me. I smiled the way women my age learn to smile. You smile so you don't seem difficult. You smile so no one accuses you of being bitter. You smile because once you stop smiling, people start explaining things slower, louder, like you're already fading. "Oh, I know," I said softly. "I'm old-fashioned." That word always relaxes people. Old-fashioned means harmless. Manageable. Someone who won't challenge the arrangement. My grandson took the phone from my hands without asking. He tapped a few things quickly and said, "There. You don't really need to understand it. Just press here if something pops up." I watched his face, not his hands. The way his jaw tightened when a notification appeared. The way he angled the screen slightly away from me, not even consciously. Small things. Younger people don't realize how much older women notice once they stop being the center of attention. I've lived long enough to know that secrets don't arrive loudly. They seep in quietly, through habits and assumptions. After they left, the house returned to its familiar silence, the kind that settles deep when you've lived alone too long. I made tea and sat by the window. The phone lay on the table like something foreign. For years, I let them handle everything. Bills. Emails. Online accounts. They said it was easier. Safer. That I'd only get confused. And maybe I believed them, because believing them meant I didn't have to face how small my space in their lives had become. But that day, something shifted. Not anger. Not yet. Something colder. Clearer. I picked up the phone again and pressed the button my grandson showed me. The screen lit up. Lists appeared, dates, transactions, numbers. Most of it looked ordinary at first. Still, I stared the way I used to stare at my children when they lied. Calm. Patient. Waiting for the mistake. Then I saw a name I didn't recognize. Then another. Then a payment scheduled for something I had never approved. I told myself I was tired. That this was exactly why they said I shouldn't be involved. But my heart didn't believe that. I leaned back in my chair and let out a quiet laugh, alone in the kitchen. They thought I didn't understand technology. What they never understood was me. I didn't sleep well that night. Not because I was afraid, but because my mind had finally been given permission to speak. At my age, nights stretch longer than days. You wake for water for the bathroom, for no clear reason at all. The house breathes around you. The refrigerator hums. Old thoughts return like neighbors who only knock when they know you're alone. I lay there thinking about how easily they had laughed earlier. Not cruelly. Casually. As if my ignorance were already settled fact, like my age or the color of my hair. Something that didn't require discussion anymore. In the morning, I moved slowly on purpose. I wanted to feel my body remind me it was still mine. The stiffness in my knees. The pause before bending down. The careful grip on the kettle. This body raised children. It scrubbed floors. It held a man's hand while he slipped out of the world. And now it was apparently too fragile to understand a phone. They had started deciding things for me years ago. Selling the car I still drove just fine. Switching doctors without asking. moving accounts online for safety. Every change was wrapped in concern. Every concern quietly removed something. After breakfast, I sat at the small desk by the window, the one they once joked about. "Do you even use that anymore?" I hadn't answered then. I kept letters there. Insurance papers. Old notebooks. Proof of a life that existed before passwords. I turned the phone on again. This time, I didn't rush. I wrote things down. Exactly what appeared. Exactly what I pressed. I've always trusted paper more than memory. Memory softens. Paper doesn't. There were monthly transfers. Not large enough to draw attention. Just steady. Names that meant nothing to me. Services I had never used. I told myself again that there must be explanations. Children are busy. Systems are complicated. That's what we tell ourselves when doubt feels rude. But then I remembered how quickly they had taken the phone from my hands the day before. I wasn't angry. Anger wastes energy. What I felt was a different kind of tiredness, the kind that comes when you realize you've been shrinking yourself to make others comfortable. By noon, my notebook was full, and my head ached behind the eyes. I closed the phone and made soup, the kind that takes time. Chopping vegetables steadied me. The rhythm reminded me who I was before everything became fast, digital, and dismissive. In the afternoon, my son called. "Just checking in," he said, distracted. "Everything okay with the app?" "Yes," I replied. For the first time, I meant something different than what he heard. After the call ended, I looked at my reflection in the dark screen of the phone. An old woman stared back. Lines. Silver hair. A face the world no longer asked permission from. But the eyes were still sharp. Still patient. They thought I didn't understand technology. What they never noticed was how well I understood patterns. And I had seen this one before, long ago, when people assumed I was too polite to pay attention. The real shift didn't come from the numbers. It came from an email that wasn't meant for me. It arrived 2 days later, early in the morning, while I was still in my robe. I only saw it because I had decided to open the envelope icon myself instead of waiting for someone else to tell me what mattered. The subject line was careless. My name was spelled wrong. At first, I thought it was spam. But something made me sit down before opening it, the way you sit before difficult conversations. The message was short. It referenced her account and keeping things quiet until next quarter. One sentence stopped me cold. She doesn't check this stuff anyway. She. Not mom. Not grandma. Just she. My hands were steady when I reread it. That surprised me. No rush of blood. No checking. Just a slow tightening inside my chest, like a door closing carefully. I checked the sender. A familiar name. Someone who had hugged me recently. Someone who corrected me gently when I mispronounced the name of an app. I checked the recipients. My name was there too, only because someone had forgotten to remove it. People think technology exposes everything at once. It doesn't. It reveals truth the same way life does, slowly if you're patient. I didn't reply. I didn't forward it. I copied it into my notebook by hand. Every word. Ink makes words accountable. That afternoon, I returned to the banking app. Carefully, I followed the dates mentioned in the email. I cross-checked them with the transfers I had already written down. They matched too neatly to be coincidence. I remembered how often I'd been told, "Don't worry, it's handled." How many times I nodded because arguing requires energy, and at my age, people think you should conserve it, as if dignity were a luxury. By evening, I understood one thing clearly. This wasn't confusion. It was organization. Quiet. Efficient. Built on the assumption that I was finished paying attention. I cooked dinner and ate alone, chewing slowly, tasting every bite. There's a strange clarity that comes when you realize you've been underestimated. Later that night, I opened settings. Menus. Places I had once been told not to touch. I pressed buttons. When I made a mistake, I wrote it down and corrected it. I didn't rush. Rushing is for people afraid of being caught. Around 10, my granddaughter called. "Dad says you're finally getting modern," she laughed. "Yes," I said, looking at the phone in my hand. "I am." After the call, I placed the phone face down and rested my hands on the table. For years, I had been grateful just to be included. Now I understood something different. I had only been included as long as I stayed quiet. They thought I didn't understand technology. What they never realized was that I had spent a lifetime learning how systems work: families, money, silence. And once you see the structure, the rest is only detail. By the seventh day, I stopped thinking of it as learning technology. It had become something else entirely, an excavation. I followed threads the way I once followed loose ends in paperwork, back when mistakes cost real money and excuses didn't matter. One reference number led to a confirmation email. That email led to a shared folder. The folder led to documents I was never meant to open, not because they were hidden well, but because no one believed I would know how. That arrogance still surprises me. There were messages archived, not deleted. People my age are assumed not to know the difference. Conversations about me, never to me. My name reduced to a situation to be managed, a variable to be adjusted. She won't notice. She trusts us. We'll explain it if she asks. They spoke about me the way people talk about weather, something inconvenient but unavoidable. I read slowly. I didn't skim. Skimming is how people miss what matters. I noted dates, tones, and patterns. How gentle they were when writing directly to me. How efficient when discussing me with each other. That contrast hurt more than cruelty would have. One message, written months earlier, made me close my eyes. It talked about timing, waiting until after my birthday, after the holidays, until she settles again. As if awareness were a temporary illness. As if clarity passed on its own, I stood and ran cold water over my wrists, the way I was taught decades ago when emotions threatened to blur judgment. This wasn't grief. It was recognition. I saw how neatly they had divided responsibilities. One handled money. One handled communication. One handled reassurance. No violence. No shouting. Just quiet cooperation built on the certainty that I would never interfere. That afternoon, I received a call framed as concern. Had I been feeling tired lately? Confused? Forgetful? The questions were careful. Almost loving. I answered honestly. I said I felt clear. There was silence on the other end. Then relief, poorly disguised. After the call, I opened the calendar app they had insisted on syncing for convenience. I scrolled backward. Appointments I hadn't scheduled. Cancellations I hadn't requested. Adjustments that made my life smaller and theirs easier. It was all so tidy. I didn't cry. That surprised me most. Tears come when you still hope things are different. By evening, I organized everything into folders. Dates. Messages. Access logs. Not for revenge. For truth. Truth requires structure, or it dissolves into noise. I sat in the quiet living room as the lamp cast a soft circle of light. I thought about how often older women are told to let go. Let go of control. Let go of questions. Let go of details. What no one tells you is that letting go without consent is just another form of taking. They thought I didn't understand technology. What they never considered was that I understood systems. And once you see the system, every secret stops being personal and starts being obvious. The worst discovery came late at night, when I was already tired and ready to stop. It wasn't buried deeply. It was disguised as care. A long message thread. Familiar names. That reasonable tone people use when they believe they are doing the right thing. They were discussing whether I should still live alone. Not openly. Carefully. Like I was fragile glass. For her safety. She's not as sharp as she used to be. We should be prepared. Prepared for what? They didn't say at first. Then someone did. If we need to make decisions without her, it's better to already have everything in place. I read that sentence several times, not because I didn't understand it, but because my body needed time to accept it. They weren't planning to help me. They were planning to replace me. I sat very still, palms flat on the desk, anchoring myself to the room. The clock ticked on the wall. That clock had been with me longer than some of the people discussing my future. There were references to doctors I hadn't seen. Evaluations I hadn't agreed to. Conversations I had never been part of. They spoke of my decline with confidence that came from repetition, not truth. Say something often enough, and it begins to sound official. What struck me most was how calm they were.
No guilt. No hesitation.
Just planning. I thought of all the times I had laughed at jokes about being forgetful. All the help I had accepted just to be polite. I saw now how those small concessions had been collected and stacked into justification. I wasn't afraid. That surprised me. What I felt was heavier. Steadier. Grief without panic. Grief for the family I thought I had. Grief for the idea that love alone protects you. I turned off the phone and went to bed, sitting on the edge for a long time, looking at my hands. These hands know the difference between weakness and rest. They know when something is being taken under the excuse of care. I remembered my own mother near the end of her life, spoken over in gentle voices, decisions made without her. How she shrank quietly. I had sworn I wouldn't let that happen to me. And yet I had nearly walked into it, saved only because someone underestimated my curiosity. The next morning, I dressed carefully, as if I were going somewhere important. Because I was. I made breakfast. Read the newspaper. On the outside, nothing had changed. Inside, everything had. I started a new list, not of transactions, but of boundaries. Things that required my voice. Decisions that belonged to me. Lines that could no longer be crossed quietly. This was no longer about catching them. It was about stopping them. I wasn't angry enough to be reckless. I wasn't scared enough to stay silent. I was clear. And clarity, once it arrives, does not ask permission to stay. Part of me wanted to stop. That's the truth I didn't like admitting, even to myself. I was 78. Tiredness settles faster at this age than courage. Silence has a soft pull, like a familiar chair you've sat in for years. That day, I did ordinary things on purpose. Laundry. Dusting. Watering the plant by the window, the one whose name I keep forgetting. I wanted to see if normal life could still hold me. If I could put the knowledge back where I found it and return to being agreeable, grateful, undemanding. For a few hours, it almost worked. Then I caught myself rehearsing excuses in my head. They mean well. They're just worried. Families do this. I recognized the habit immediately. That was the old reflex, rounding sharp edges before anyone else had to feel them. I sat down heavily and let the thought finish itself honestly. If I stop now, this will still happen. Just later. Without warning. Without my consent. That was the moment the hesitation cracked. It wasn't fear of confrontation that had slowed me. It was fear of loneliness. Once you stop being useful, once you stop being pliable, people pull away. I had seen it happen. I had comforted women who whispered, "They don't call much anymore." But something worse existed. Being present, yet erased. That afternoon, my granddaughter stopped by unexpectedly. She drank tea, laughed, showed me something on her phone. Then she said casually, "Dad says you've been a little stubborn lately." She meant it fondly. Like stubborn was a quirk. I smiled because that's what people expect. Inside, something settled. Stubborn at my age is just another word for no longer obedient. After she left, I opened the drawer beside my bed and took out everything I had collected. Notes. Copies. Messages. I laid them out slowly, like cards on a table. I asked myself one question and answered it honestly. If I do nothing, what happens next? The answer was clear. More decisions made without me. More concern used as leverage. One day, a conversation framed as inevitable. I had buried women who lived that ending. That evening, I stood in the bathroom and looked at myself for a long time. Not searching for strength. Just confirming presence. I was still here. Still capable. Still allowed to decide. I didn't need speed. Speed makes mistakes. What I needed was direction. The next morning, I began with the practical things. I called the bank, not to accuse, not to complain. I asked for an in-person appointment. I said my name, my age, and that I preferred to handle certain matters face-to-face. There was a brief pause. Then agreement. After that, I called a lawyer whose card I had kept for years, just in case. We had never been close, but he had handled matters for women like me before. Widows, business owners, people who didn't shout but expected precision. I didn't mention my family. I didn't accuse anyone. I asked about protection. About consent. About what could be done quietly and legally before anything became urgent. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "You're asking the right questions at the right time." That was when I knew I wasn't late. I was early. That afternoon, I reviewed everything again, not to doubt myself, but to be thorough. I imagined their reactions once they realized I was no longer passive. Denial. Concern. Anger disguised as worry. I practiced saying nothing. Silence unsettles people who rely on access. That evening, my son called. His voice sounded careful now. "Everything okay, Mom? You've seemed busy." "I'm fine," I said. And this time, there was no double meaning. After the call, I placed my phone on the table and folded my hands the way I used to before decisions that couldn't be undone. I felt no rush.
No thrill.
Just steadiness. This wasn't about exposure yet. It was about position. You don't step into the light until your footing is secure. Before bed, I organized my drawer one last time. Everything labeled. Everything dated. Not weapons. Walls. I slept deeply that night, the kind of sleep that comes when you stop bargaining with reality. They thought I didn't understand technology. What they didn't understand was that my real move wasn't digital at all. It was deciding that my life at 78 was still mine to defend, calmly, legally, and without asking permission. The lawyer's office was small and orderly, which I appreciated. No grand displays. No speeches meant to impress. Just files, shelves, and a man who listened more than he spoke. I sat across from him with my handbag on my lap, my back straight, my voice steady. "I don't want to accuse anyone," I said. "I want to make sure no one can decide my life for me." He nodded once, slow and thoughtful, as if he'd heard those words many times before, from women who waited just long enough. We went through everything carefully. Powers of attorney. Account access. Medical directives. Digital permissions. Each subject revealed another place where convenience could quietly replace consent. Not illegally. Just smoothly. "Right now," he said, tapping a folder, "too many decisions could be made without your explicit approval." Conveniently. That word followed me like an echo. I signed nothing that day. I asked questions. Took notes. Knowledge first. Action second. That order has saved me more than once in my life. From there, I went to the bank. The branch smelled faintly of paper and disinfectant. A comforting combination. The young man at the desk spoke slowly at first, until I met his eyes directly. His tone adjusted immediately. Respect often does, when it realizes it's required. I asked to review access logs, devices, authorizations, notifications I hadn't been receiving. When he hesitated, I reminded him calmly that the account was mine, and that I was present. Doors opened. We removed secondary access. Updated confirmations. Corrected contact details. I watched his screen as carefully as he did. When he asked if I wanted help setting up alerts, I shook my head. "No," I said. "I want to see everything myself." He smiled, not indulgently, with something closer to recognition. By the time I returned home, my bones ached, but my chest felt lighter. Control doesn't feel dramatic when it comes back. It feels familiar, like something you misplaced and finally found where you left it. That evening, the messages began. Soft at first. Concerned. Polite. Had I changed something by accident? Was I feeling overwhelmed? Did I maybe press the wrong button? Every question carried the same assumption, that whatever had happened was unintentional, that I was still the kind of woman things happened to. I answered kindly. Briefly. "I'm managing things." That sentence unsettled them more than anger ever could. The phone rang more often that week. My son stopped by without calling. He stood in the doorway, scanning the room like he expected to find chaos, papers scattered, proof that I needed help. Instead, the house was clean. Quiet. In control. "You seem busy," he said. "Yes," I replied. "I've been taking care of some things." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He offered help. I declined. Before leaving, he said, "If anything feels complicated, you can always ask." "I know," I said. And I meant it differently than he heard. After that, the tone changed. Less warmth. More urgency. They asked about specific accounts now. Specific appointments. They were testing doors to see which ones still opened. Most of them didn't. One evening, my granddaughter called, confused and frustrated. Something she usually handled easily had become difficult. The system must be glitching, she said. I'm not having any problems, I replied. There was a long pause. Oh, she said finally. That was when I knew the discomfort had spread through them like a draft through a house. They didn't panic. They adjusted their stories. I was being stubborn. Influenced. Going through a phase. I let them believe it. At night, I sat with my tea and thought about how older women are expected to announce their intentions loudly to be taken seriously. I had chosen the opposite. I let evidence speak first. By the end of the week, invitations appeared. Sudden interest in my schedule. Offers to review things together. I declined without drama. Everything is in order, I said. Order is a threatening word to people who benefit from chaos. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. The way I used to feel when a negotiation was nearing its end and the other side had just realized I wasn't bluffing. They still didn't know everything. But they knew enough to be uneasy. And that mattered. They thought I didn't understand technology. What they were beginning to understand now was that I had quietly stepped out of their reach, and that whatever came next would happen on my terms, not theirs. The moment arrived without drama, which felt appropriate.
No shouting.
No urgent phone calls. Just a suggestion, framed as concern, that we all sit down together so there wouldn't be misunderstandings. That word again. Misunderstandings, as if truth had simply tripped over itself. I agreed. We met at my house. Neutral ground, though they had forgotten it was still mine. They arrived together, carrying the quiet confidence of people who believed they were being generous with their time. Polite smiles. Careful tones. Chairs chosen deliberately, as if position still mattered. They spoke first. They always do when they think they're in control. They asked how I was feeling. If I'd been stressed lately. If I'd noticed myself getting overwhelmed. One of them mentioned how confusing modern systems can be, especially at this stage of life. They spoke slowly. Kindly. Rehearsed. I listened without interrupting. I let the silence stretch just long enough to unsettle them. Then I reached for the folder. I didn't slide it across the table dramatically. I opened it calmly, the way I used to open ledgers when someone insisted the numbers were wrong. I began to read. Dates. Amounts. Authorization records. Messages. Exact words. I didn't add commentary. I didn't accuse. I simply read. I watched their faces change. Confusion came first. Not guilt. The shock of being seen. That's not what it looks like, someone said too quickly. I'm sure it isn't, I replied. Which is why I took the time to understand it fully. The room shifted. Chairs adjusted. Breathing changed. They realized then that this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was preparation. I showed them the bank changes. The removed access. The updated directives. The medical evaluation. Everything dated. Everything documented. I didn't explain my reasons. Facts don't require explanation. They tried emotion next. Height. How could I think so little of them? How could I go behind their backs? I almost smiled. I didn't go behind anyone's back, I said. I stepped back into my own life. Silence followed. Not the comfortable kind. Someone asked what I wanted now. Apologies? Control? An admission of wrongdoing? The way they asked told me they still thought this was a negotiation. I want what I've always wanted, I said. To be consulted. To be respected. To not have my life arranged like a storage unit. No one interrupted me. Then came the real question, the one that revealed fear. Are you going to tell people? Someone asked. Expose all this? No, I said. I don't need an audience. I needed boundaries. That was when something broke. Not loudly. Quietly. They understood that the version of me who smiled and deferred was gone. They left soon after. Not angry. Shaken. When the door closed, I stood in the hallway longer than necessary, feeling the house settle back into itself. I wasn't triumphant. I was tired. But it was the good kind of tired, the kind that comes after finishing something important. I returned the folder to the drawer and closed it gently. Not locked. Not hidden. Finished. They thought I didn't understand technology. What they finally understood was far more uncomfortable. I understood them. And once that understanding was spoken out loud, there was no pretending it hadn't been there all along. They didn't leave me alone after that. I hadn't expected them to. The days that followed unfolded exactly the way predictable things do once you know their shape. First came the apologies, careful, conditional. We didn't mean it that way. You misunderstood our intentions. We were only trying to help. Help, I noticed, was always something done to me, never with me. My phone rang at odd hours. Messages arrived late at night and early in the morning. Long explanations I hadn't asked for. Short ones pretending nothing had happened. Each attempt circled the same idea, restoring the old balance without admitting it had ever been wrong. I answered some. I ignored others. That too was a choice. When my son came again, he looked smaller somehow. Less certain. He sat where he always had, but his posture had changed. He spoke about family. About loyalty. About how painful it was to feel distrusted. He never spoke about consent. You could have just talked to us, he said, frustration leaking through his calm. I did, I replied. For years. You just didn't hear it. That ended the conversation more effectively than any argument. They tried softness next. Nostalgia. Stories from my past retold as if they were reminders of who I used to be, as if strength were something I had misplaced instead of something I had carried quietly all along. One evening, my granddaughter cried. Real tears. She said everything felt unstable now. That I had scared them. That they didn't know where they stood with me anymore. I held her hand and told her the truth, gently. You stand exactly where you always have, I said. You're just seeing the ground clearly now. That was the hardest part, accepting that my boundary caused discomfort. Women my age are trained to treat discomfort as failure. But discomfort is sometimes just the body learning a new position. They asked eventually if things could go back to normal. I thought about that word for a long time after they left. Normal had meant silence. Normal had meant being spoken for. Normal had meant smiling so others wouldn't feel awkward about diminishing me. I'm open to a new normal, I said finally. One where I'm included, not managed. They nodded. Whether they understood or not, I couldn't say. The days grew quieter after that. Fewer messages. More distance. At first, the space felt tender, like a bruise. Loneliness doesn't vanish just because it was necessary. But something else grew in its place. I began to enjoy my mornings again. I read without interruption. I made decisions without rehearsing how they would sound to someone else. I noticed how much energy I had spent being agreeable. One afternoon, I laughed out loud at something on the radio. The sound startled me. It had been a while. My granddaughter still visits. We talk differently now, more directly. She asks my opinion and waits for the answer. That matters more than apologies ever could. As for my son, our relationship is quieter. Less performative. We speak like two adults who understand that love does not cancel accountability. He no longer manages my life. I no longer soften my words to protect his comfort. It is not warm. But it is real. Sometimes I think about how close I came to disappearing politely. How easy it would have been to keep nodding, keep smiling, keep letting decisions be made for me because it was easier for everyone else. Age tempts you to shrink. To simplify yourself so the world doesn't have to adjust. But here is the truth no one tells you when you grow old. You are not required to fade quietly. I didn't expose them publicly. I didn't humiliate anyone. I didn't shout or threaten. I learned. I paid attention. I used the very tools they mocked me for not understanding and saw the truth laid out plainly. Technology didn't give me power. It gave me visibility. And visibility, at my age, is dangerous to people who benefit from your silence. I am still 78. My knees still ache. I still misplace my glasses sometimes. None of that changed. What changed was my posture in the world. I stand where I stand now, not where others find it convenient to place me. If you recognize yourself in this story, the quiet mother, the patient grandmother, the woman told she doesn't need to understand, listen carefully. You don't have to be loud to be formidable. You don't have to be young to be sharp. And you don't have to accept being handled just because it's wrapped in concern. Learn. Ask. Look. Even if your hands shake. Especially then. They thought I didn't understand technology. What they never truly understood was this. I have lived long enough to know when my dignity is at risk. And I am old enough now to protect it, without asking permission.